Let's talk about the first two novels in the Barsoom series by Edgar Rice Burroughs, Princess of Mars and Gods of Mars. These are also called the John Carter stories. Really, Barsoom's better because they're set largely on the planet Mars, aka Barsoom, and some of the stories don't involve John Carter, so we'll call them the Barsoom series. I'm going to put it down because the light is already not very good, and man, reflecting off a shiny gloss red cover. But anyway, so what are these books about? They're very famous, but what are they about? You might have seen the film, in fact, from 2012 or 2013 or whatever it might have been. Not as bad as some people thought. Not very good. These are seminal novels in sci-fi and fantasy. I think it's fair to say they cross genres. They're genre forming along with, say, H.G. Wells in the same kind of time period. The start of the 20th century, and perhaps also writers like George MacDonald Fraser and George MacDonald and Lord Dunsany as well on the fantasy side, let's say, and indeed Hope Mirrlees on the fantasy side. Now, the first two novels, they were serialized in magazine form in 1912 and 1913, and they were published as novels in 1917 and 1918, respectively. Princess of Mars was published in 1917, Gods of Mars in 1918. What's the rough plot? Well, John Carter is a Confederate veteran of the American Civil War who essentially his heir finds mysterious documents saying, various instructions with burying him, or rather putting him in a vault, and where he's going to be, and to leave him alone there, and that he can then enjoy. So the heir is Edgar Rice Burroughs, and he's to enjoy the estate of Captain John Carter to a degree. Now, where has Carter gone? Well, it turns out he tells Burroughs that sometime before, 10 years before, I think, or something, or 20 years, 10 years, I think, he had been out in the Wild West and essentially gotten into an incident where he had ended up in a cave, hiding from his enemies, and came across a strange figure with a strange device on it. He touched the device and he ended up, it turns out, on Mars. He left his body behind and went to the planet Mars, which is inhabited, much, with that early 20th century vision of a dry, dead planet, which is full of mystery and alien life. Now, that's the rough plot. He turns up there, and it turns out John Carter is very, very good at everything. He's a very good fighter. He's charming. He's handsome. He's diplomatic when he needs to be. He's a very stereotypical hero. We'll get to that. But the general principle is that he goes there and he has mad adventures. And they're incredibly creative. I think a big thing to say straight up is that Burroughs is creating whole cloth in some instances, or at least it feels like that. He's saying, oh, well, what kind of aliens would there be? Well, there'll be some humans who have red skin, but kind of. So what are they called again? Kangaroos and things like that. They are pouch bearing creatures, egg and pouch bearing creatures. But there's also these green Martians who've got 4 arms, 2 legs, 6 limbs altogether, who are much more savage. And there's these decaying cities, and there's these airships. And John Carter, because he's from Earth, on the weak gravity of Mars, can just jump around, and it makes him even more competent than he already was. And so there's this very technicolor universe. It's both that style, that kind of content, and also the style of writing is very much in the pulp fashion. It was serialized originally, a chapter per issue, and there's always a cliffhanger. Something always has to happen. There always has to be an incident in the chapter. Much more so than even in a normal adventure novel. So the format, the style, and indeed the creativity are all aiming towards this lurid, much brighter than you'd imagine, much crazier than you'd imagine world. So anyway, John Carter ends up on Mars. And he ends up, I think initially in the first book, Princess of Mars, he ends up amongst the green Martians, who are savages. These terrible 4-armed savages, very strange creatures, and he wins their respect in various ways, but they're not like him. And it kind of develops from there. He also comes into contact with the red Martians, the human-like Martians, and their great cities and civilizations of millions and millions of people. And various other instances happen like that in the first book. The second book includes further adventures of John Carter on Mars. And the big thing there is that when he's on Mars in a different set of incidences, he discovers much more about the peculiar, complex religions of Mars, the stories and legends he's heard, and the reality behind them, what's really going on. And that includes even more kind of crazy invention of different worlds and sub-worlds and groups and civilizations and personalities. So you can see, in that sense, it's they sound, you can imagine, fairly pulpy. He has to deal with these savages. He meets Dejah Thoris, the beautiful, incomparable Dejah Thoris, the beautiful princess of Mars. And in the second one, he deals with what people believe about Mars. And you could imagine thinking of Conan the Barbarian, or perhaps by Robert Howard, or H.P. Lovecraft's worlds to do with the strange, pulpy, dark religion of Mars. And that's all fair, that's all reasonable. And that might lead us to think that there are assumptions, we might make assumptions that this is very outdated. It might be fun, it might be seminal, but it's very outdated. And there are certainly lots of stereotyped aspects to the stories. John Carter constantly says, I've never been able to say no to a fight. I could barely control my sense of honour. I'm unparalleled with the sword, this sort of thing. Telling the audience both his inner world, but also his abilities, but in this ridiculous, over-the-top way. The way that gender is often presented is very stereotyped. Dejah Thoris, but even there, we'll get to that, but Dejah Thoris is a damsel in distress, and women fall in love with John Carter. It's very inevitable. Nothing else could happen but to fall in love with John Carter. That's a major theme. Even there, you begin to get these pinpricks, such as that Martian women have very specific technological expertises and jobs and abilities. That Dejah Thoris is a very strong character in some ways, sometimes at least. Another area where you might think, well, this is very outdated, is he's a Confederate officer, and there are green savage Martians, obviously Native Americans, and you might think is the allegory, red Martians, and then there are other colours of Martian that you discover over the course of the series, and it's very interesting to think, okay, so there's a racial aspect, you're going to have a lot of racial theory, this Confederate is going to be all for the fact that people are superior to other people, but this, even more than with gender, is very interestingly handled, and I'd go as far as to say that our first assumption about his assumptions turn out to be nearly entirely wrong. Essentially, the biggest thing he says is that nurture, not nature, context, not genetics, determines character and what you expect. The Green Martians are savage largely because they do not have families. They do not have family units. They have a sort of platonic creche system. Burroughs certainly responds to that idea by saying, no, it would not lead to a race of philosopher kings, but to savages. He values family. And so where there is disruption in Martian society, in Green Martian society, what a significant way it happens is based on family and the fact that the platonic creche system is not trusted or relied upon by a Green Martian parent. You see the same with the other racial dynamics. The fact that amongst the red Martians, the civilized airship dwellers, there are wars and they're savage and cruel, and there's severe ruthlessness. One really quite striking image and a sign of someone quite ready and easy with what happens in warfare is that when a Martian airship surrenders, the way that's signalled is to the death until the captain leaps off the airship to his death as a symbol of surrender. It's a cruel world, and the red Martians, though they are our friends, they're also our enemies. They're John Carter's enemies at times. And that complexity goes further with the way that other races are handled. The other races who descend from the original human race of Mars, with the Greens obviously not being human in the way that the others are. So who you can be friends with, and what loves can develop, and who is the bad guy, these are things which are challenged in these two books in a way that, for a man perfectly comfortable with the Confederacy, not necessarily its existence, but with its legacy, perfectly comfortable with this hero who's so good at everything who is a Confederate, should surprise us and should show nuance in the genre and in the author. I really thought that was interesting and challenging. I was regularly taken aback as he considered religion, as he considered society, as he considered the way the character is formed, and thinking, for these silly pulpy novels, these are actually very deep, in their own way, to a limited degree. They also have fantastic action. They're very entertaining action scenes, especially because of John Carter saying how amazing he is. He leaps around, he battles people on the decks of these ships. He, like Superman, leaps with a single bound. In fact, I wonder, almost certainly, surely, Superman's original ability because of the power he draws from the sun, he's able to leap over a skyscraper with a single bound. That must come from John Carter, who's earlier, who, because of the low gravity, can leap, triple, quadruple, whatever the distance, with a single bound. It's very entertaining, and the inventiveness is very engaging. It feels fresh now, over 100 years later. The plant men of Mars, the white apes of Mars, the ruined cities, the white and the black and the red and the green Martians, the airship battles, the gigantic irrigation systems. All of this feels fresh, because really seminal texts are often seminal not because they're the first, but because they are the freshest. They are so successful because they present something fresh and engaging to their readers. So, with some caveats about, that you might find some of this very stereotyped, I would certainly recommend these two novels to anyone who wants both a history lesson in the genre, both sci-fi and fantasy, because it crosses a boundary, but also if you're interested in high-octane action, in dashing stories, and in a surprisingly complex and subtle investigation of the themes of the books. What did you think? If you've read the books, tell me in the comments. Until next time.